Xiaolongbao or soup dumplings are not a weeknight meal or something that you can whip up quickly, but rather a project for a hobbyist home cook like myself. It's pretty time consuming and there's a lot of tedious work involved, and honestly frozen dumplings go pretty hard and they come pretty close, and in some cases it's cheaper to do it that way than to make it at home. But none of that gets you the satisfaction of completing this on your own at home, so if you're one of those people or you just want to watch me do it, then here we go. By the way, goes without saying, but this is not even remotely authentic, I'm just trying my best here. We're going to start by making the aspic, or the pork stock that makes up the soup in the soup dumplings, and I'll get to why mine looks like this in a minute. Ideally, you're going to need some pork bones, particularly neck bones, which are pretty commonly found at Asian markets, and also some pork skin, which I could not find at my Asian market. Look what I have.
No way.
In the flesh. Literally.
So where'd you find it?
Hispanic market, bro.
Ah, yeah, makes sense.
Like I always say, you gotta avoid the white stores.
You don't always say that. And also, I went to the Asian market.
Say it with me. You gotta avoid the white stores.
Okay, you're not listening.
What were you gonna do? Try to use the unmarbled Walmart pork chops instead? Get cultured, man.
You're the one who doesn't know how to cook and can't pronounce birria.
Okay, so we're going to add those pork bones and pork skin to a pot and cover with water. We initially need to bring this to a boil and then let that go for 10 minutes so we can purge the bones. You'll see all the scum that rises to the top. We're just going to discard all this after 10 minutes. And then it's a good practice to scrub off the bones and the meat of any weird things that you find on them. Sometimes there's a little bone fragment sticking out or just various pieces of dirt and whatnot. But after all that, you'll add this back into the pot and cover with clean water. And then I'm also adding in 2 green onions that I've just roughly chopped, and then about 1 inch worth of ginger, which I've just sliced really thinly like this. Then you'll just simply bring this back to a boil and then lower to a simmer. And really important here, I made a fatal error and covered this while I simmered. You're supposed to leave this open so that it can reduce while it simmers for a couple hours. Otherwise, your stock is going to be more diluted and be more liquidy. In my case, it didn't ruin everything, but it definitely would have been better if I left this open. Either way, you just simmer that for 2 hours and just make sure nothing is sticking to the bottom and burning. After that, you can remove all the solids, which by the way, there's some pretty nice meat hanging off those neck bones. Good for a snack. But I'm pouring my stock into a wide baking dish like this so it can cool down. I let that cool at room temp for like 30 minutes and then I just covered it in plastic wrap and stuck it in the fridge to finish cooling. I think like 4 hours would be a minimum, but you should go overnight if you can. For reference, here's how some of the leftover stock looked after I boiled and reduced it for a little bit. So much better, and I made some extra dumplings with that. In the meantime, we can prep our pork filling. This starts with 1 pound of pretty fatty ground pork. In order to better control the fat, I just used a pork shoulder I had in my freezer and cut off 1 pound of this and then ground it up. You definitely don't need to, and you can just find some fatty store-bought stuff. But to that, I'm going to add 3 grams or a half teaspoon of kosher salt, 2 grams or a half teaspoon of sugar, a half teaspoon or small splash of sesame oil, 1 tablespoon, maybe 2 of soy sauce, and 2 tablespoons of shaoxing wine. Finish with a good shake, maybe a 1/4 teaspoon of white pepper, another 1-inch knob of ginger that I'm just grating in on my microplane, and 3 green onions that I've chopped really thinly. I just get in there with a gloved hand and mix and mash this all up until it's homogeneous. And once that aspic is cooled down, it should solidify with all the gelatin inside of it. You can dump that onto a cutting board and you'll see that mine is not super pretty here. I'm pretty sure the main reason is because I covered this while it was simmering and didn't reduce it, so it should be much more concentrated and have less water in it. Also, I pulled this out of the fridge at exactly 4 hours, so it probably could have solidified some more. Either way, we're just chopping this into little bits so we can add it into the filling. For a pound of pork, you want to add roughly 1 cup of this aspic, and then you just want to fold that into the mixture so it's also homogeneous. These little gel bombs are what are going to become the soup once this is heated back up. Pretty cool how someone thought of that. Now for the dumpling wrappers, this is something that I always recommend buying at the store. In my opinion, it's just too convenient and too cheap to justify going through this process on your own, but here I am doing it for once just to say I did it. It's very simple but tedious. We're just going to start with 150 grams of all-purpose flour, which is like 1 1/4 cups. And then we're just adding in 80 milliliters or a 1/4 cup of warm water. I'm starting with a wooden spoon just to keep my hands clean until it's cohesive. Then you can get in there with your hand and knead this until it starts to stick together, after which you can knead it on the counter for about 10 minutes, I'd say. You're just trying to smooth this out and hydrate all the flour evenly and strengthen that gluten. Wrap that in plastic wrap to fully hydrate for about 30 more minutes, and after that you can take this out and roll it out into a semi-narrow log. If you're really good at eyeballing this, you can use a bench scraper to cut off about 20 even pieces. They should weigh about 11 or 12 grams each. You can use a scale for accuracy. I ended up guessing pretty wrong on most of these, so I had to readjust with my scale after. Either way, with each wrapper you can roll this out into a really thin circle. It's pretty much going to be as thin as you can get it, maybe 5 inches in diameter. So just keep turning and rolling and keeping this even all around to make it as much of a circle as you can. You want to be able to see some light through it, so I would call this translucent. Then you can grab your filling, and I would add a little less than a teaspoon for this size wrapper. You should get the feel for it as you go. But then comes the process of sealing these, which is a little different than the mandu that I've made before, or something like gyoza. I hold this in my non-dominant hand, and then with my dominant hand I grab the edge of the dough, and then I'm just starting with one of these little pleats here, and you basically want to keep that point as the bottom of each additional pleat that you make. It's also a good idea to use your non-dominant hand to pull the edge a little thinner right before you pleat it. It's just going to help the top not to be too thick. And I think they say 16 to 20 pleats is what your goal should be. It's definitely easier said than done, and my first few were really ugly, so you just have to do this until you get comfortable. Some people leave a little hole at the top, but I could not do that for the life of me, so I'm just sealing this together with my fingers. By the way, I'm keeping everything that I'm not touching under a towel or plastic wrap just so it doesn't dry out. But the finished dumplings are going onto a parchment-lined baking sheet until I'm ready to use them. And when it's time, I grab my bamboo steamer for authenticity. I'll link this one below. This has 2 levels on it, so I can fit 2 stages of dumplings. I find that my wok is easiest to use for this, so I just fill it with a couple of inches of water and then get that to a simmer. I also add cheesecloth to my steamer because it'll help the dumplings not to stick. They also make liners you can use, or you can just cut little squares of parchment paper. But just carefully lay in as many dumplings as you can fit without making them touch, and then load up the steamer onto your wok and let that steam for about 10 minutes. In the meantime, we'll quickly whip together our little dipping sauce. I'm just adding a couple tablespoons of this Chinese black vinegar. I think Chinese red vinegar is the more authentic one, but it's harder to find. And then I'll just dump in a few slivers of chopped ginger. They're just going to bloom and flavor that vinegar perfectly for these dumplings. I'm also adding a small splash of dark soy sauce. Just remembering that the wrappers are not seasoned, and then my aspic is not seasoned also, but it's also very diluted. But anyway, once your dumplings are done steaming, you're done, and you're ready to eat. Best eaten as soon as you can because that soup and filling are nice and hot inside. But these are simple, yet beautiful. This is a wonderful gift to the whole world. Let's taste test.
Yet another classic. I'm glad I finally made this, and I can't wait to try it. A lot of work just to get some soup inside of dumplings when it would be a lot easier to do it on the outside, but there's just something to be said about the experience of having soup in your dumpling. I already broke this one, but there's a little bit left in there. Let's get some sauce. Cheers. My goodness. I know food is taste and texture, but to me, it's also the experience, and this is just one of the best. So glad we have different cultures that make food in such different ways than the rest of us. I know there's no white people that would have ever come up with this. Let's try one of these the right way. Man, that hits every time. I know I said I would definitely do store-bought dumpling wrappers next time just because it's way easier. You don't really save any money doing it at home, but they definitely do come out a little better when you make them by hand. Just thankful to have experiences like this. I'm filming this while I'm off of work for the end of the year, and it basically took me all day to do this, but to me, every moment was worth it. Man, these don't stay warm for super long. I need to get a camera crew so I can do all this stuff faster. But are you a fan of xiaolongbao? What other foods from other cultures should I try next? Let me know. But as always, thank you all for watching, be blessed, and I'll see you next time. Yes. Now what if we could get the bloomin' already inside of the onion?